welcome back to Lifting the Lamp. I'm Frater Eleftheria, and well, it's been about a week since the US government released their disclosure files, the UAP files, which give us some insights into some of the things that the government knew about the UFO phenomenon. Momentous occasion in human history, but also at the same time rather underwhelming, if I don't say so myself, at least so far. Don't get me wrong, there's some good stuff in there, but just not enough. Not enough information, I think, to satisfy a lot of people that have been waiting for this moment for a long time. But I figured people would want to hear my 2 cents on the disclosure that's happened so far, my reaction to it, and that's what I'm going to give tonight. I think that I can give a bit more insight, perhaps. I knew that people would want me to talk about this, so I've gone and I've looked at the website, the Department of War website where all of this is published. And while I haven't read everything, I've definitely gone through the low-hanging fruit, the very short documents that are published on there as PDFs, the images, the videos, and a few at least of the bigger PDFs on page 1, which has given me a good idea of the kind of stuff that's in there and what isn't in there so far. So I wanted to give an overview of what I've found so far, my thoughts, and what I think the biggest takeaways of the current tranche of documents is, so that you don't have to spend all of your time, several hours, fossicking through pages and pages of documents. You just know where to find the good stuff. And to summarize things as much as possible, and then consider what this disclosure of these documents means. So this is what I've been devoting my spare time to for the most part over the last week, if I have any spare time. So what have I discovered so far? Looking through these documents, combing through. I'll make some general points first. It's just very interesting the way this information has been laid out. The reason I say that is because all the really meaty stuff, like the videos of UAP, the NASA transcripts, some of the images that are more impressive, like all of that stuff is towards the very end of the documents. If you go to page 1 of the results, what you instead get is a series of quite long PDFs, which are from the FBI's files dating back to the 40s. And each document is like almost 200 pages long for the most part. And it's quite tedious. It's all these case files and the really old-timey kind of typewritten text, and just pages and pages of that. A lot of newspaper cutouts as well. And within all of that, a lot of stories that are clearly just completely bogus. So that, it's talking about a prank that some neighborhood kids played on a lady by throwing stuff over her fence, and she wrote to the FBI thinking that this was a UFO. And then, there's this other guy who claims to be speaking on behalf of the Martians who are going to take over the Earth within the next year, and he sends out a radio signal with a very basic encryption to tell the world that this is happening, but he's really just a bit of a loose unit, and there's nothing to it, obviously, because we're still here and the Martians haven't taken over. So you read through all of this, and it's not only are the stories obviously bogus, but then the documents are just really long and really tedious to read, and it puts you off going much further than the first few results on the first page of results. I think this is actually a strategy. Donald Trump gave the directive for government transparency on UAP, but the agencies themselves and the government departments themselves have a bureaucracy that have got a mind of their own, and they may well have used every bureaucratic trick in the book to try and stall things, to try and make things difficult, to try and bury things. And I think maybe there's a bit of that going on here. They want to demoralize people who are looking for the truth, so that they think there's nothing that's worth the effort to find, so that less people will want to actually find out what's in the documents, like the really heavy hitting stuff. Not that that's been released yet anyway. But if it were released, I think we would find that some of the people that may have initially expressed an interest in that will be dropping off because of the way the information is presented. And honestly, I think it's deliberate. You know, people in these intelligence community agencies, they understand behavioral psychology and they understand the way the media is meant to work because they're all embedded in it and controlling the narratives within it for the past several decades. So they know that if you want to present a story that you want people to take a hold of and to hold their attention and really listen to what you're saying, you give the meatiest, pithiest, shortest, but also the most interesting bit of information first as like a hook to get people interested in the rest. And the exact opposite has been done with the way that these files have been presented, and I would be very surprised if that's not deliberate. So I've looked at everything except for 16 of the large PDFs, but I've got to go back and look over those. And there have been a number of magazine and newspaper cutouts in these documents, and I've just very quickly skimmed over them because there's nothing groundbreaking in that. It's like the lowest tier of intelligence gathering to cut out a clipping from a newspaper and put it in a scrapbook. So I doubt we're going to get anything that's going to rock our world in terms of what we know about what the government knows by reading those documents. But I do want to look at what some of the highlights have been of looking through those first documents that I've looked through and those first files that I've looked through. So in the very first PDF on the first page, it does repeat a few stories which we already know about in UFO lore, but now seem to be affirmed by the US government. And in the second document as well, for that matter, on the first page of results. So the first thing that caught my attention on the first document, on the first page of results, with the document name ending section 10, there's a story in there about a purported Nazi UFO experiment. So, you know, there is what was considered or is considered conspiracy theory that the Nazis actually created unconventional aircraft that looked like UFOs and were a kind of a UFO, if they're encountered by the Allies. This story, if it were true, would corroborate that. It's a story of one Mr. Payel, I believe it's pronounced, Herr Payel from the Luftwaffe. He was given an assignment in the Black Forest in Austria in 1944. For the Germans, obviously. The document says that he was a test pilot for a top secret aircraft project, what we would term colloquially as a Nazi UFO. But then he also says he was responsible for photographing the craft while it was in flight, so I don't know if that's a bit of an inconsistency, but anyway. There's images as well of what this craft looked like. According to the account, it used a series of jets that were kind of around the saucer-like body which spun around, and that's apparently how it propelled itself. It apparently took down an Allied plane at one point. That's what the story is. Whether there's any truth to that, who knows? On page 99 of this first document is a picture which is now infamous doing the rounds on the internet. That's because it's an image of a very short humanoid alien, which is a proven fake, very early hoaxed alien encounter. And people are saying this and pointing to the fact that it's been debunked and saying, you see, it's a psyop. The FBI or whoever are trying to trick us into believing things that are a hoax. This isn't real disclosure. They're trying to make us believe things that aren't real. But in the FBI's defense, I think what's going on with these files is they're filing absolutely everything. So if somebody who's not of sound mind has a thought about UFOs or finds a photo that they think is legit but really isn't and forwards that onto the FBI, then they have to file it away in a document folder somewhere. Because on the off chance that that intel is important, it's going to be really bad if they haven't taken a log of that. So what you end up having is you capture all this information and a lot of it is just garbage, basically. But they've got to note it all. So what's happened with this photo is somebody has written in on like a handwritten note to the FBI enclosing a copy of this bogus photo of an alien and saying, please send me your comment on this photo. It's not that the agency is disclosing this photo or saying it's a real photo. It's just that they have to record everything that they get, whether it seems bogus or not. But by the same token, you would have thought that since there's obviously stuff they haven't released yet because the government have said more files are coming, you would have thought that they could have curated these a bit more to get rid of more of the bogus stuff and add more of the interesting stuff. So there's definitely a deliberate choice in putting so much stuff that's obviously fake into these files, and perhaps there's something a bit nefarious going on there. I don't know. So there's quite a few anecdotes of people who saw a craft, usually in the form of the traditional disc or sphere with a metallic or luminous quality to it, sometimes a cigar shape. Pretty stock standard stuff for anybody who has been watching the UFO issue for the past 70 years. In the second file on the first page of results, there's a person who gives some theory about how they think the UFOs work, to do with air traveling through different pipes and things like that. It's quite quirky. There's some references in the first and second document to the Men in Black. There's a couple of references to that phenomenon, which is interesting. The fourth result on page 1 of the results, page 8 of the actual PDF, there's a story that's quite famous in the UFO community, which is the story recounted by Officer Lonnie Zamora on a UFO which appeared during a car chase that the officer was on. He got distracted by a loud roar and saw a flame descending down that was kind of blue and orange, and then later saw that a white egg-like craft had landed with some little legs, and there were two figures accompanying it who were short human type figures with white coveralls, and the craft had a red insignia on it. And we get the notes on that case in the files and a little doodle of the insignia that apparently appeared on this craft. Now, there is a theory that that symbol could actually be a decoy, not the real symbol, but this is the information that's included in the disclosed documents. There's a little bit about the theories that the US military have on what these craft could be, particularly the belief that it's a foreign military technology seemed to be their first instinct. I imagine that it became a bit more ambiguous as time went on as to what these things really were. The Kenneth Arnold story, the kind of OG flying saucer story, is in there from page 138 in the second document on the first page of results. And then there's this other story that's attached to the Kenneth Arnold story, which is also already quite well known in UFO lore, about the Maury Island incident and this Harold Dahl guy who claimed to see a UFO dropping debris, and then Raymond A. Palmer, who was an editor of Amazing Stories magazine, catching wind of it and offering Kenneth Arnold $200 to go to Tacoma and investigate the incident. This strange material, which was supposedly debris from the incident, appearing. It got later tested and turned out to be ordinary cast iron. But then two Army officers eventually investigate the incident as well and take the debris with them, and their plane crashes and they both pass away. And so this has led to some speculation that maybe they really did have debris and somebody didn't want it to be known. But the story for the most part looks pretty bogus, actually, but it was included in there. So that story was recounted in the third document on page 1 of the results, especially from page 89 of the document itself. At page 133 of that same document, there's some good illustrations of a UFO that was seen by one A.C. Yuri. I enjoyed looking at this one. It was something a little bit different. I didn't look at the rest of the documents on page 1 because they're all very long and I didn't have time this time around. But I did go to the very last document on page 1 of results, which was completely different to the other documents on that page. And here's where I think maybe there's some mind games going on again. Because like I said before, the rest of page 1, you've got these nearly 200 page, in one case at least, over 200 page documents that are just a load of crap for the most part. Then at the very end, the very last result, you've got just a very short document which consists mainly of these photos that someone purportedly took of some kind of UFO in 1947. The photo was taken at Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and it looks like a very clear image in the second photo of an orb type of craft, or an orb type of phenomenon, flying in the foreground of a vista, some houses with some mountains, and then another photo which is that same vista, but it's just got the trail as though the UAP has already gone past. This photo looks impressive, which makes it all the more suspicious why it was so buried on the first page of results. You would have got demoralized a long time ago before you finally reached that last result, and you wouldn't think of that it would be any different to every other result on that page by that point. Now, having said that it looks quite impressive, I have done my own analysis on this photo and decided that it's fake. I looked at this, and the first thing that I thought was there's something not quite right about the lighting of this and the way the UAP looks. And I thought, well, maybe there's some way that this effect could be faked, or a photo could be modified to create this effect. And I asked my wife, who's a photographer, and she said, yeah, there's a good chance that something like this can be done. And so I had a bit more of a look at it, and I played with the image, and I just thought to myself, there's something that looks kind of similar about these two images. I wonder if I put them together a certain way, if it makes any kind of composite image. And of course it does. The trail that the UAP is leaving behind changes from one photo to the other, even though it's meant to be the same vista. And then if you put the two photos side by side, the trail is continuous across one photo on the other, even though it's supposed to be the same vista. And it looks like what's happened is somebody has messed with the film, the part of the film reel that has these two photos on it. They've done it across both of them together, so it makes a single effect that crosses over both of them. So I think what's happened here is somebody has got a very small droplet of some liquid, put it on the negative, and then it's kind of pulled a bit, and then they've turned the negatives that way, and then the droplet has gone down and it's left a little trail and then gone off and left this little trail behind. And the thing that makes this theory even more compelling is if you invert the colors of the orb, you can clearly see that it's like some kind of a watermark from a black liquid that has seeped into the negative and left a watermark behind and has stained the negative. And it looks a lot to me like this is some kind of black liquid, maybe a drop of ink, and that's how the effect has been created. So I've come to the conclusion that image, impressive though it is in fact fake. And there's a couple of things that concern me here a little bit. One is that these are supposed to be unresolved cases. Now, it was pretty easy to demonstrate that this photo was a hoax with just a few minutes of analysis and critical thinking, at least for me. But this has been sitting in a file somewhere for probably like nearly 80 years and treated as unresolved. And that's a little bit concerning, to be honest. So I'm not quite sure what to make of that. Maybe the FBI was just filing everything away and then forgetting about it and not really bothering to analyze it further. It's very strange anyway. But it's also strange, given that it's so clearly a fake, that it's still buried, like deliberately underneath some other less impressive documents. All that I can conclude with that is that the image is compelling enough that even if it is a lie, it is tantalizing enough to make people ask more questions and want to investigate the phenomenon further. And that's perhaps why it's so buried. So that's my thoughts on that anyway. So there's some impressive stuff on page 3 of the results on the web page. The first result is a recording from Gemini 7 of a bogey, which is quite interesting. The second result on that page of results has got stuff about the Foo Fighters that were reported during World War II. The sixth result down on that page, that's page 3, is quite interesting because it gives us quite an interesting illustration of a UAP that somebody saw in Indiana in 1948, sort of propeller-like in shape. I just thought that it was a neat looking UAP, and that's why I decided to give it an honourable mention here. Even though I say that there's nothing remarkable about these cases, and it's something that people that have been following the UAP issue know already for decades, the sheer volume of these different reports coming in really lends a lot of weight to the fact that something unidentifiable is happening here, which I think is worth something at least. The subsequent pages, particularly pages 4 to 6 of the results on the website, have got a lot of short mission reports, mainly from the Middle East, some email correspondence. Many mission reports are linked to one of the videos that appears later in the results. Ironically, there's a couple of videos of incidents that happened around the Strait of Hormuz a few years ago. So maybe they were hanging around because they knew something was going to go down in that area. Who knows? That's just sheer speculation on my part. Page 15 of results has got some interesting stuff to do with the Apollo missions, Apollo 11 and 17, as well as Skylab. And those were quite interesting to read, actually, particularly the description of an object by one of the Apollo missions, which looked like a cylinder type of a thing, but changed shape to become like a book instead. Very bizarre. And if that is a UAP and it's not part of the Apollo craft that they'd mistaken for something, then that's quite interesting because it shows that different people can look at a craft and see different shapes. So it can kind of change the way it's perceived from person to person. Quite interesting. There were some photos of the lunar surface from the Apollo 12 mission and some anomalous little shapes appearing in those photos. Very different types of shapes and colors as well. I particularly liked the UAP that looks like one of the Minions. I thought that was quite funny. But some very weird and wonderful things that appear in these files, but incredibly pixelated. Even the video footage from various Middle Eastern campaigns or Middle Eastern bases, you know, it's all very grainy and very small little specks that are moving through the field of vision for the most part. You can kind of make out like some things look like a blob with an appendage, like a jellyfish type of thing perhaps. And of course there's the star craft, which we'll get to in a moment. But for the most part, very low res, very low quality video. But it makes you think, you know, because the skeptics are always harping on about, oh, well, if there's so many UAP and everyone's got a camera in their pocket, why aren't there more photos of these things if they're so real, if you really saw what you said that you saw? And now we've got like the best military grade infrared cameras that still can only pick up on a little white dot. So get back in your box, skeptics, is what I'm trying to say. And wipe that smug smile off your face. So some other weird and wonderful things that appear in the documents that I've looked at so far. On page 16, the fifth result is a PDF, and on page 6 of that PDF, it talks about the Mexican Congress and some evidence that was put before them about the existence of extraterrestrial life, including the now debunked alien bodies. I just thought it was interesting that that was included as well, because that's another much ridiculed example of supposed evidence that has been presented to prove the existence of non-human intelligence. It looks like a high school student made it in their ceramics class, if I'm being brutally honest. It doesn't look like something that's real at all, that alien body. I'm sorry. So is this a further attempt to discredit that there really is anything behind the UAP? I don't know. And of course, the fourth from the bottom on the page 16 of results is that infamous sketch of the UFO, which is like a golden ellipsoid shape. A lot of orbs, a lot of videos of orbs, 2 or 3 orbs all flying together in formation in some cases, interesting maneuvers going on, all stuff that experiencers are well aware of, and people who have studied UFOs or UAP for years are very familiar with. Nothing groundbreaking there. But I want to just go on as the last item that I cover tonight to the infamous star UFO. This is the 5th result down on page 10 of the results on the website. So I've looked at this footage a few times and come to a conclusion and then changed my mind and then changed my mind again. And now I think I've settled on an opinion. So I had a bit of a suspension of disbelief when I first saw this. And then I thought, oh, this is too good to be true. This can't be real. And then I saw supposedly someone claims that they've debunked this star UFO by saying that it's a flare and that it's got a parachute attached to it. And you can see the parachute in the frame, and that lighting effect is the same as what a flare does. I've looked at the video with fresh eyes, taking account of all that, and I've got to say, while you could certainly try and read that into the footage, if you look at it carefully, that's not actually what it's showing. For one thing, although you've got a vaguely starburst kind of a shape, which would be consistent with how a burst of light would appear on a film like this, there's still like a bit of structure within the center of the star. So rather than just diffuse light in the center, which then tapers out into these little rays, what you have is like arrows coming out. It looks like the chaos star, of chaos magic. Nothing is true, everything is permitted. And so it's these little arrows coming out. So there's still little areas that aren't blackened out in the middle of this thing. So it's got quite a bit of complexity to it and structure to it, which an ordinary light burst can't reproduce. And then if you look at the supposed parachute that comes into the frame, it sort of, the side of the parachute disappears at one point as it's kind of twisting around. And I'm pretty sure, unless we've got some undisclosed cloaking technology that applies to parachutes and that's malfunctioning or something, I don't think that a parachute does that. So I think more likely what's happening is it's like a lens flare type effect from the light of this object, and it's in inverted colors because that's the way the camera reads it. I'm not saying that it's definitely extraterrestrial or anything like that, but I don't think that it's been debunked. And it is a very intriguing video, I think, which deserves to be thought about a little bit more carefully. But what I don't think that it is one of the ophonym. And this is something that I wanted to address as well, because you've got Representative Anna Paulina Luna, who very cryptically posted a picture of one of the ophonym on, I believe, her X account. And yeah, there are people saying that it's one of the ophonym, which, if you don't know what that is, it's one of these angelic beings that appears in the book of Ezekiel, which is become the basis of the biblically accurate angels, so-called. The wheels within wheels, and the wheels are covered in eyes, etc. And so there are people saying that some of these objects are the ophonym. I'm not saying that's what Representative Luna was saying, but there are some people who mean it in quite a literal way. Now, I just want to make one thing clear to everybody. Ezekiel's vision of the ophonym was part of a broader vision of the throne of God being pulled by a divine chariot. And all of the imagery in that vision was meant to be taken symbolically, not literally. So there's different orders of angels depending on their proximity to the throne, and the outermost order in that vision are these ophonym who represent the wheels of the chariot. That's why they look like wheels. They're carrying the Almighty. That's their divine function. The reason why there's different wheels that could be facing different directions, all encasing one another, is to represent the fact that God's influence can travel anywhere in the cosmos, and the fact that there's eyes all over it means that God is omniscient or all-seeing. So each of these characteristics of the ophonym are meant to be a symbol of some characteristic of a transcendent power. It doesn't mean that there are literally things that physically appear as wheels within wheels in the physical world in that form. Let's just get that completely clear. But look, people have very validly said that there's things that have appeared which look similar to this particular star craft in other things that have come up. And I would add to that as well that in Josephus's War of the Jews, which is a account of the history of Judea in the 1st century, there is an account of a sword star which appeared over Jerusalem in about 66 AD, which sounds very similar to something like this. If you interpret a 4-pointed star or 4 spikes coming off a central point as like a sword shape, then perhaps the sword star that appeared over Jerusalem 2,000 years ago was similar to what this star-shaped craft is. Perhaps. That's pure speculation. It could be something completely unrelated to any of that. But still some intriguing possibilities. So those are the things that were noteworthy from what was there. But even more glaring, I think, is what wasn't there. So, for example, in the first few results covering the mid to late 1940s, given that we had stuff about the Foo Fighters and Kenneth Arnold, I really would have expected to see something about the Roswell crash, but that seems like a glaring omission that I haven't encountered that yet. And I've got 16 documents to trawl through, but still surprising. And perhaps there's a reason why that's been omitted. Perhaps there's information about that incident in particular that they really don't want to share with us. They're really holding out on us on. But I want to know more about the Roswell crash because I'm personally invested in the Roswell incident, because my magical name of Eleftheria is a name that I adopted in large part because of synchronicities related to the Roswell incident that entered into my life. So I've got a bit of skin in the game finding out more about Roswell. I was very disappointed to not find anything about that so far. And yeah, just once again to repeat the point that none of this is particularly groundbreaking. There's no new information that we didn't know before that comes from these documents. It doesn't tell us who they are, like who's responsible for these phenomena, whether anyone from the government or the military has met with them, whether we have technology from them, whether they are beings that appear in our religious stories, confirming any of that. Nothing like that has come out. What kind of energy propulsion systems they might use, none of that has come out or been acknowledged. So once again, as with the Age of Disclosure documentary, very surface level disclosure at this stage. But let's see what else comes out in the subsequent weeks. Honestly, I'm not holding my breath, and I think now we're getting to a point where we kind of don't rely on government anymore to tell us what's true and false. And government has lost so much of its legitimacy over the last few years that that route for discovering what's true and false is kind of going out of fashion pretty quickly. But you never know. You know, they were collating a lot of data, and maybe there's something that'll come out that helps us push forward in our understanding of the phenomenon. We'll see. But that's my analysis of the documents that I've looked at so far. And if I get around to finishing off the rest of the documents and I find anything interesting, maybe I'll do a follow-up video. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe to my channel to support my work, hit the notification bell so you actually get notified of my new videos, hit join or thanks to support me further, join my mailing list, link in the description below. And in less than a week, my book, The Voces Caelesti, or Book of Heavenly Voices, is coming out, and I'll be doing a launch day for that next Thursday. So keep a lookout on my channel for details on that. But thank you for listening to tonight's video, and I hope to see you next time.